So in this video, we're going to add tick to a player controller, simple code change, and by the end of it, we'll have something like this, where we've added a tick method in, and we'll be requesting an aim towards the crosshair every frame, and then we've got a little bit of pseudocode for what that'll do. We won't quite get to it in this video, and the idea is we're setting up for, in our game, the ability for that little white dot to send a bit of information about where that hits in the world to the aiming system so that we can start moving the barrel and the turret to point in that direction and fire the projectile. Okay, so see you in there. Okay guys, so we have basically found a couple of things. We've got the AI controller finding the player, and the player controllers possessing the tank, the AI controllers possessing their tanks. So we kind of have the top layer of this nearly ready to go. We have these things. What we want to do now is focus for a moment on aiming at the crosshair, because that's the hardest thing to do now. Aiming at the player is going to be really simple because we've got the tank finding the player, and actually finding the player's location from that is pretty simple. I think it's .getActor location or something. So we'll come back to that. But the bit that worries me more is how do we aim at the crosshair? We're going to have to do something like line trace through the crosshair on the screen and hit the world and check we're hitting the world and yada yada. So because it's a more challenging problem, to me, I like to tackle those first because it's the most risky part of the project. So that's what we're going to look at next. So we're going to go back to the tank player controller class. Let's get that up on the screen. Visual Studio needs to load. And we're going to start thinking about how to aim towards the crosshair that's on the screen. You know, the little white dot that we put in UI a few videos ago. So we've got the tank player controller C++. I'll get the header file next to it as well. And let's start thinking about what we're doing. Well, one of the things we're going to need is a tick, isn't it? We're going to need to have the tank player controller actually ticking, which it isn't doing at the moment, because there's no tick method in here. And we're going to use the tick to update the aim every frame. So let me just pseudocode it, then I think I'll get you to implement this tick to revise the idea of adding a method that's not there like we did a few videos ago. So we're going to basically go tick, and then on tick we're going to do something like super, i.e. do what the super class it does in its tick, and then we're going to have a method that's something like, in fact let's call it this, aim towards crosshair. A very thin, simple tick function. I always like the ticks to be very clear about exactly what they're doing. It does mean that aim towards crosshair could be quite expensive and that we need to be very careful about how long that takes to run, but I do like the tick to be very simple and clear. So that's what I want you to do now. Not write aim towards crosshair, leave that in as a comment, but I do want you to write what's necessary for this player controller to actually tick. So you might need to revise what we did a couple of videos ago with begin play, but it's not rocket science. In fact, if you were to look in the tank CPP, it would give you a pretty good idea, to be honest, or any other actor class. But let's do that. So make the player controller tick. I want you to declare and define the tick method inside the player controller, and then check that it works with a simple log message. So go ahead, pause the video, and do that now. Wicked, welcome back. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. I'm going to look at tank CPP for inspiration and remind myself that tick tends to take float delta time. Now this is risky, but by the way, because the tank player controller is based on the A player controller class and the tank is based on the A pawn class, and it may be that the way that player controller and in turn controller implements tick might be different, but I don't think it is. So as a first port of call, let's go ahead and just assume that we have exactly the same thing, tick float delta time like that. So that's the end of it. And then what we're going to want to do is have a void on the front, void tick float delta time. So it passes in every time it ticks this delta time. Then we'd say super to call the super class's tick method, colon, because it's a static accessor. And then we go tick with the same signature, but we need the delta time in there. Now, again, if this all looks bamboozling, what on earth am I doing? I'm just recreating exactly what you see in, say, the tank CPP file. This code here. All I've done is switched out a tank for a player controller, or I haven't yet, but I'm about to. Comme ça. Okay, so that should be the definition of the tick that we need, and what we want to do in that tick is aim towards crosshair, but we don't have that method yet. I think that I won't bother with the method just yet. I'm just going to put in a temporary log, UE log temp, warning, text, and we're going to say player controller ticking. Put a semicolon just for consistency, although we know that it doesn't need it. I'm going to check the matching of my brackets because we've got a lot of brackets here. That looks good. That bracket matches that bracket. I'm also going to declare this method. Now, the declaration, remember, as before, it's a virtual void tick with at least the float override. So let's go do that in the player controller. So let's think about what we're doing. We don't need the class name. Virtual. Virtual is just a good habit. It's completely optional here. We're just saying that if we were to make a child of this player controller class, then its children would be allowed to override and extend the behavior of the tick method. Fine. So then what? Virtual void tick. Now float delta time. We don't have to put a parameter name there, but we may as well do exactly what it does in tank.h. You see that? And then the other final thing we need on the end is the override. Just as a recap, what that means is it makes the compiler check that there is indeed a method with exactly the signature I've just highlighted on the screen in the parent class or one of the parent's parent classes. Okay, so that's why we do it that way. Let's just make sure this puppy is ticking. Going to compile it up and see if we get the relevant log messages. And if we do, we can progress a little bit. It's going to take a few videos to get this aiming working fully. If I'm going to do it at a reasonable pace and not bamboozle everybody, it's going to take a few, but it's going to be worth it. It's a really powerful, reusable thing to know. How do you look through the screen position? So I've done a boo-boo. Delta time is an undeclared identifier. What have I done there? Delta time, it's a simple capitalization issue there. And also, what do they do about spacing? Do they put, yeah, they put some spaces. So let's write code like the engine code. Okay, now that delta time and that delta time match. And let's recompile. So then what we're going to do, just as a recap, is that white dot, we're going to be raycasting through that white dot and seeing where it hits the world. Now look, you'll notice the compile finished while I was yabbering on, and if you look in the output log, the player controller ticking has come in, and that's called hot reloading. It's a fantastic feature of using either Xcode or Visual Studio with Unreal, and it actually recompiles the code and pushes it into the running game so you can live see your changes, which is pretty cool. By the way, Unreal 4.12, Unreal 4.12 has just shipped, and we're not quite yet going to include it in the course, just going to probably wait till 4.12.1 when it's going to hopefully be a little more stable. There's a load of stuff on the web about it, VR editing and the like. One of the things about it is that it actually requires on a PC you to use Visual Studio as your IDE. So be aware of that if you're going to go to 4.12. But I do recommend you use Visual Studio if you're on the PC. Pretty much any version of it will do, any of the modern versions. And it's a good and free IDE. So another thing I want to thank Andrew Hunt from the Facebook group for is there is actually a very cool plugin called Visual Assist for Visual Studio. Now, it's not free, but you know how Visual Studio takes absolutely ages to autofill or to do anything with such a large code base because all of the engine code is sitting here in our solution as a separate project. It takes ages. You keep seeing it take ages to do anything. This Visual Assist turns that into an instant process. Now, it's $100 for personal use or $200, $250, I think, for business use, but I just recommend you take a look at it. It's at wholetomato.com, not Rotten Tomato, and it's worth your time. Anyway, I will be assessing that, maybe including it in the course if I can get a deal for you guys. So that's it. We have now just simply revised that ability to tick. I'm just going to write the aim towards crosshair method so that it's there for completeness, and then we will start fleshing out aim towards crosshair in the next video. So I like to have my begin play above my tick because to me the order of things is begin play, tick, and then my methods. I've got a getter, so the getter will go next, and then I'm going to implement this thing which is simply, what do we call it? Aim towards crosshair. So it's going to be void, it's going to return nothing. It's going to be called aim towards crosshair. Question is it const? No, it's not const because aiming towards the crosshair is going to change something about the tank player controller state, so we don't need a const on it. So there's your aim towards crosshair definition. Now it's worth declaring this straight away because all the time there's a Visual Studio error like this, we're not going to get much help inside the method with our composition of our code. So I'm just going to go and declare it now. It's private, it's a private method, and it's just going to return nothing, and it's simply going to, well, let's write what it's going to do in a comment in the header file. This is going to start the tank moving the barrel towards, or so that a shot would hit where the crosshair intersects the world, okay? Worth putting in a bit of a comment there. Start the tank moving the barrel so that a shot would hit, not it, where the crosshair intersects the world. Okay, that's what it's going to do. And we come in here. One of the first things we're going to want to do is we're going to say if we don't have a controlled tank, then we need to get out of here. So if not, get controlled tank. Remember you're not. If you don't do that, then this method will always exit, of course. Then we just exit. And then I'm just going to pseudocode the rest of it. So what we need to do is we need to get world location through crosshair, or if you line trace through the crosshair, and then if it hits something, i.e. if it hits the landscape, then we're going to want the controlled tank to aim at this point. That's the pseudocode. All right, so that's what we're aiming for with this aim towards crosshair. See what I did there? Okay, so let's just compile this, and then we'll split this here and start again in the next video. Of course, there's no brand new functionality here apart from this ticking log. By the way, the ticking log we should probably get rid of in the tick method of the Tank Player Controller CPP. We don't need it now. It was just to prove that we got ticking working. So if we play, there you go. The ticking's still there because I haven't recompiled, but I'll leave it recompiling, and then I'll go off when that's finished and commit my work, as I'm hoping you're doing. Hope you're getting on well with the source control, and I'll see you in the next video.